Alright guys, for chapter 10 I'm going to be doing a series of shorter videos which will hopefully significantly increase the watchability of them. I know it can be tough to sit through a half-hour lecture, especially if you're sitting at home. At least for me personally, it could be difficult to sort of focus in on one thing for a long period of time when I have all my stuff that I could be messing around with. So yeah. These will be a series of shorter videos. I'm going to try to do each section as its own individual video and try not to get too close to 10 minutes. I'm going to try to keep them close to 5. We'll see how it goes though. So, chapter 10 is all about life history. And a couple of my friends at the University of Pacific, Dr. Zach Stahlschmidt and soon-to-be Dr. Jordan Glass, studied life history trade-offs within crickets. I texted Jordan. He would not send me a picture of himself, and so I put up this generic photo of a handsome guy. They studied things like food availability and temperature to see what kind of different crickets they could get to develop. And so that is the basics of what we're going to be talking about today. It's going to be mostly due to reproduction in the series of videos, though. So, for instance, the particular crickets they were studying had short-wing morphs and long-wing morphs, and so it depended on what kind of food availability, how much food there was that they could just eat. It depended on things like the temperature of their environment. If it was too hot, they would develop into different kinds of things. Chapter 10 is all about life history. So what is life history? What do I mean when I'm talking about life history? Life history is an organism's lifetime pattern of growth, development, and reproduction. Age-specific patterns are adaptations that evolve through natural selection, so we're going to talk about what age-specific patterns means. And why would these adaptations limit an organism's ability to do equally well under a variety of different environmental conditions? And so what I mean by that is, why is it that an organism wouldn't just be sort of optimal under every single possible circumstance? And we're going to talk about why that is the case. Touching my face. So one of the reasons for the fact that organisms can't just be optimal everywhere is that least resources are limiting. You don't have unlimited food, you don't have unlimited toilet paper, you don't have unlimited stuff everywhere you go. And so oftentimes doing one thing means that you can't do another thing. So let's say, for instance, you put a whole bunch of resources into reproduction. Well, maybe that makes you less able to grow. Okay? And so what winds up happening is you wind up with these trade-offs happening. So maybe you put a lot of resources into producing many, many, many offspring all at the same time. But as a result, you yourself aren't able to get as big, which means your offspring are starting out in life less able, potentially, to survive and thrive. Okay? So these are the kinds of life history trade-offs that we're talking about. Like, for instance, let's say you're a musician and you're really interested in playing piano. It's probably going to be very difficult for you to be able to play piano and guitar at the same time. They each have their own advantages, but you're more interested in piano, and so you set guitar aside and you play piano more. Maybe that's a stupid example, but that's the kind of thing we're talking about here. Let's say you're a species, you're going to invest more into one thing as opposed to another, and that is the trade-offs that are involved in life histories. Trade-offs could involve the mode of reproduction, the age at first reproduction, allocation to reproduction, number and size of eggs, young, or seeds, the timing of reproduction. So mode of reproduction, are you going to be sexual or asexual? Age at first reproduction, you would think that the younger you are, the better off you would be in terms of reproducing, but that has a few issues that we're going to talk about later. Allocation to reproduction, how much do you need to invest into your offspring in order for them to be successful? Obviously, you as an individual want to reduce the amount that you have to invest, right? So that you can continue doing other things, continue reproducing. But if you aren't investing anything into your offspring, you're probably not going to do as well. number and size of eggs, young, or seeds, how many offspring are you producing at one time, timing of reproduction, that could be sort of developmentally or perhaps seasonally. But again, if you decide to do one of these things, you might not be able to do another. So let's say you want to have 1,000 offspring born at a time. You have 1,000 offspring born at a time. You're probably not going to be able to do that very often. You may probably only be able to do that like one time. Or let's say you want to have offspring when you're very, very young. Well, you haven't fully developed yet, and so you're probably only going to be able to maintain or even be able to birth one offspring at a time. Okay, so the reason for these trade-offs are the physiological, energetic, and environmental constraints. Okay, physiological as in perhaps you haven't developed enough, maybe you're not big enough. Energetic, you have to eat a certain amount of food in order to be able to invest that energy into your offspring. And environmental, so let's say for instance, the region you're in suddenly gets really, really cold or really, really hot or something like that. You're going to have to put your time, your energy into dealing with those environmental constraints. Or let's say it's very, very dry where you live. Perhaps you're going to have to invest in the creation or evolution of some sort of egg in order to keep your offspring from desiccating. Okay? And there are intrinsic and extrinsic environmental constraints put on organisms, and we're going to be talking about that here shortly. So intrinsic factors, the evolutionary history of the species, developmental patterns, genetics, physiology. These are things coming from internally. So let's say you are, let's say you're a bird. This is going to be really dumb. Just bear with me. Let's say you're a bird and you look down on the beach and you see sea turtles and you say, hey, I'd like to reproduce like the sea turtle. So I'm going to go ahead and lay, 100 eggs or something like that at a time. You can't do that. Your evolutionary history does not allow you to do that. This is an internal constraint on your life history. Extrinsic, it's an intrinsic constraint on your life history. Extrinsic factors would be the physical environment. Are there predators or not? Are there other organisms competing with you or not? Okay, so intrinsic comes from inside. Extrinsic obviously comes from outside. So in the next section, we're going to be talking about the differences between asexual and sexual reproduction, the genetic relationship between parent and offspring during asexual reproduction and why that potentially can be problematic, and how does sexual reproduction promote genetic variation. So if you're bored for that last section, stick around because this next section, we're going to be mostly talking about sex.